Few things in cycling are more annoying than an unrelenting creak spoiling an otherwise perfect bike ride in a beautiful location. Creaks can be annoying, but in rare cases, they can also be dangerous too. Plus, a smooth bike that's just running perfectly and silent is so satisfying. So if you have a creak on your bike and you're not sure what's causing it, well, I'm going to go through some of the most common causes of creaks, how you can fix them, and also explain what causes them. Now, before I get onto the causes of creaks, there's a general rule of thumb for all of the things that I'm going to suggest. Whenever you tighten anything, you should always make sure that it's at the correct torque. And to do that, you're going to want to have a good quality torque wrench. It's highly recommended that you invest in one, and one like this bad boy from Park Tool is a great example. The other thing that you should consider using is some kind of grease or assembly compound on components of your bike that are touching as well. Not every part needs this, and there are different greases for different applications, but for things like bearings, something like this synergetic race grease, assembly grease from Silka is really good. First thing, bottom brackets. Now, when anyone has a creak on their bike, the top answer on Family Fortunes, Family Feud if you're American, is always the bottom bracket. That seems to get the blame straight away ahead of everything else. So creaks are often caused by other things, but because bottom brackets do cause creaks and it's everyone's favourite creak cause, I'll address that first. So the first thing you should do is just check for any play in your bottom bracket. And again, this is something that we'll look at on other parts of the bike too. But to do that, you can simply take your crank arm and you can just try and pull it against the bike in a direction that it shouldn't move. So it's designed to move in a circular motion. It's not designed to move side to side. If there's any play in it, then there's a good chance that the bearings are knackered and that's what's causing your creak. The next thing you should do is just take your chain set off and inspect the bearings. Now, bearings that are good are nice and smooth when you run your finger in them. Bearings that are worn out and need replacing are typically gravelly, and you can actually sometimes hear them. They're not silent when you run your finger through them. And you can just feel the roughness with your fingers like that. And that's a sign that it needs replacing. Now, in some cases, your bottom bracket might just have got some dirt in there on the spindle and it just simply needs cleaning. And by just cleaning and re-greasing things, you can actually get it working properly. Maybe it's got some play in it because it's not properly tightened. So again, make sure things are properly tightened, put back together, clean with some fresh grease. That might fix the issue. However, there are some bigger problems that you can get with bottom brackets that are far more difficult to fix. So misalignment of the actual bottom bracket is something that's nothing to do with you or how you've treated your bike. That can just be that the shells into which the two bearings go at either side of the bottom bracket, these aren't bottom bracket bearings by the way, they're smaller ones that have come out of some wheels, but the two bearings, if they're not aligned properly, I'm exaggerating it there, but it only has to be a tiny amount, then that at the least of your worries, that will cause your bottom bracket bearings to wear out at a faster rate. And the worst case is that they just constantly creak all the time. Now, this is something that's not as common nowadays. Bike manufacturers have got better at making bottom brackets and aligning the two halves of the bottom bracket, but it is still something that can happen. So if your bottom bracket is misaligned, and this is something that some shops can check for you, then that's something that you should take up with a manufacturer. This is one of the advantages of threaded bottom brackets, and why a lot of bike mechanics like them, is by having a threaded bottom bracket with a metallic shell that goes through and is joined at both sides. You often have better alignment with that kind of system, and so that can mitigate the issue. The other thing that can be an issue is actually the interference fit of how press fit bearings press into the frame. So they press into cups, and if where they're fitted into the frame is slightly too big or slightly too small, that again can cause problems with the bearing. If it's slightly too big, it's a bit of an easier fix because you can just use some Loctite, or other people use retaining compound, and that sort of fills the gap and then makes it good and yeah, it's often going to be not creaking from that point onwards. With the chain set out, you can see the bottom bracket bearings here. However, something else that often gets misattributed to a bottom bracket creaking is actually the chain set bolts. So these need to be correctly torqued up. Some manufacturers also recommend again that you use Loctite to just secure those threads, but others don't. So check with the brand that you have, because sometimes when they're Loctited in, they just become incredibly difficult to remove. Now, if one of these bolts is not the correct torque or slightly loose, it can just cause a slight bit of movement of those two metal chain rings against each other, and that is going to cause you a nasty creak. But most of the time, something else is causing that creakage. And, well, the first thing that we should talk about is your frame itself, because this is potentially really serious. If your frame is creaking, then there's a chance that it could be damaged, and then there's a chance that it could catastrophically fail and break while you're riding it, which if you were going fast could, well, I mean, doesn't bear thinking about. So in the case of carbon fiber frames, if you've suffered a crash or there's been some impact damage to the frame, that can cause a crack, and then you can start to get delamination of the layers of carbon fiber. And as they delaminate and sort of open and close, it creaks. And that can sometimes be heard when you're riding along. Now, the best thing to do is to check your frame for any damage. So if you've crashed it, check after that. But also if your bike is creaking and you're not sure, just check over your frame. Common areas where carbon fiber bikes can get damaged and then creak are on the stays. Be wary of that. Sometimes if the bike has had a head-on impact, it can cause damage to the steerer tube, and that could be inside. So take your steerer headset off and take your fork out and inspect the steerer. Other areas on the top tube here, where you've crashed and the bar has struck the top tube. This can also cause damage to the handlebar. So if you have a carbon handlebar, take the bar tape off and check that. Now, sometimes people find marks and damage on their frame, and this is normal, wear and tear. If you're not sure if it's something more serious and there's more than just some cosmetic damage on the surface, the best thing to do is to take it to a specialist. There are quite a few places now that are carbon fiber repair specialists and people who can properly inspect a frame and tell you how serious the damage is. It's worth doing. It's not just carbon frames. Steel frames can creak, especially if they're lugged. Typically you can get a point of weakness at the lugged joint. I had an aluminium frame that used to creak because it was quite flexible, and the chain would rub on the chainstay because the frame was creaking when I was giving it some out the saddle. I also once rode an old Look bike, which was one of the first carbon fiber bikes. It had carbon fiber tubes and alloy lugs. We actually rode this in a GCN video, and that bike was really creaky, which was a little bit scary to ride. And the reason is that the adhesive that bonded the carbon tubes into those lugs was so old that it deteriorated, and it was now not as strong as it should have been, and so there was just that movement and that creaking noise. To illustrate this, I've actually got a saddle here which has been used by one of the guys over at GMBN on their mountain bike a lot. It's had a very tough life, but listen to this. People don't always realise it, but like many parts on your bike, saddles do wear out. Well, how quickly it wears out, like many things, how long's a piece of string, depends on you and the type of riding that you do. So when Connor Dunn was a professional cyclist riding huge amounts of miles every year, he's told me before that at his peak he was changing a saddle every 4 months because, well, he's quite a big lad, but he was just doing so much. And the reason for this is that the saddle can actually take quite a lot of stress and abuse, and it just wears out over time. The actual saddle body itself can start to sag over time. And also typically what you're getting the creak from is the joint from where you've got the saddle rail, and that is joined into the saddle body itself. But something to be aware of, saddles do wear out over time, and you are eventually going to have to replace them, like many things on your bike. It's easy to diagnose though. If you ride out the saddle and the noise stops, then well, this could be the problem. For those of you using rim brakes, quick release levers are a notorious cause of creaks, but fortunately this is one that's very easy to fix. So simply take them out, check that the hole in which they go through is nice and clean as well on the hub of your wheel. A pipe cleaner is a good way to clean that. And simply clean them and apply some grease to them and reinstall them nice and clean, and yeah, it should take the issue away. The same thing can happen with through axles that you get on disc brake bikes, although in our experience, creaking through axles is much less common. They seem to be very good at securely sort of being held in place, and yeah, don't seem to cause anywhere near as many issues. The next cause, which is more common than people realise, is Freehub's creaking. This is something that you will often notice the more torque you put down. So when you're doing hard efforts, or if you get out of the saddle, this type of creak often starts to become louder. Now, what causes it is that dirt and water ingresses inside the Freehub here on your back wheel, and the grease that should be in there gets washed out or gets contaminated, and then you get rust and corrosion occurring. And also, if there's enough dirt in there, that will also wear away at those rotating components, and this is going to cause creaking and noises. So the thing that you have to remember is that Freehubs need servicing, and you're going to need to stay on top of them. And also, if you're riding in really dirty, horrible conditions with nice wheels, then it's going to need more frequent servicing than if you were riding in nice, dry, clean conditions. Now, if I pull this end cap off, that's partly there to add some protection to this drive side bearing. You can see the seal on the bearing is the yellow bit. Now, all of the bearings in this bike, and in most bikes now, are cartridge bearings like this. Now, those seals on them are designed to protect them, and they're good at keeping dirt and water out and keeping the grease that's inside this bearing, which is there to act as a lubricant, in. Now, what you absolutely shouldn't do is clean your bike with some kind of penetrating spray like WD-40, especially combined with the little stick of death that it often comes with. Because I've seen people do this, they spray that on their cassette to clean their cassette, or they spray it on their bottom bracket area or near their Freehub, and what that is excellent at doing is penetrating that spray in past the seal, washing out the grease that you want there, and then your bearing is not lubricated, it wears faster, and also it's going to corrode faster as well. So yeah, don't do that. Another thing that can cause creaking in this area, but is less common, but is still something that happens, is the cassette itself. And usually this is centered around the rivets on the cassette. So the cassette is made up of individual sprockets that slot onto the Freehub body, but then you often get a cluster of sprockets that are joined together. It's usually the back 3 or 4 sprockets, and those are joined together by rivets. And if those rivets wear out and become loose, you can develop a little bit of play in the cassette, and then that will cause a creak. Unfortunately, if your cassette does have a creak in it and has become loose, it's designed as a consumable part, and so that's unfortunately going to mean that it probably needs replacing. And the last big area we're going to talk about is the headset. So this is the steering of the bike, essentially. It's where you have the fork coming through the frame, and then there are bearings, usually a lower bearing here and an upper bearing in the top of the head tube of the bike. Now, if again, dirt and water has ingressed in here, it can just be causing friction and noise, and that can cause creaking. Or it can be that your headset has become loose and that's causing a creak because there's some play in it. They can work loose over time. Or it can be that your bearings are completely knackered and need replacing. Now, the first thing to do is to check for play. You do this with the bike static on the ground, and you hold on to the front brake and you try and rock the bike forwards and backwards. You'll be able to see usually if there is play at the top here, you will be able to see the steerer tube just moving back and forth relative to the frame. It shouldn't, it should be completely rock solid. Then if there is some play, you can take the steerer tube out, and you can take the headset out, and you can check it, give it a clean, re-grease it, put it back together, tighten it up to its proper torque to remove the play. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, that usually solves the issue. Check the bearings, they might be worn, but even so, even if they are worn, properly tightening it up, giving it some fresh lube should give it some extra life and stop it making noise in the short term. However, your bearings are ultimately going to need replacing. A note on the bearings in your headset though, modern bikes have cartridge bearings in them like this, but much bigger diameter ones than these. And older bikes tend to have, such as vintage steel bikes will often have cup and cone bearings with loose balls that are carried in a cone, and they're bearings that you can generally service more easily, and you can just apply some fresh clean grease to them and reinvigorate them. Whereas cartridge bearings like this, once they're dead, they're a consumable part. They're designed to just be thrown in the bin and replaced. One way you can often diagnose a creaking headset as well while riding is by getting out of the saddle and pressing down more on the bars. This puts more pressure on those headset bearings and will often make the noise worse and the creak louder. Bonus creakage for you, because it's not even on your bike, but something that people often forget about, is stuff like your shoes, right? When you've got cleats on the bottom of your shoes, they wear out and they need replacing. And sometimes, whether it's the bolt that holds the cleat into the shoe, or maybe the carbon fibre sole of your shoe has become worn out and that's flexing and creaking, or just the cleat mechanism itself, all these things can creak. And on older stuff that you've had a long time, that could be the cause of the creaking. Now, when cleats start to creak, they usually need replacing at that point as a rule of thumb. But again, you can quieten them down by applying some lube. Although, again, avoid penetrating sprays with the little stick of death, because they're not good. And also when you start spraying those around your pedals, they get in the bearings on your pedals, and no, just don't use that stuff. It's terrible. It does have a place, but usually bikes and lubrication are not it. So there you go. Check your shoes, check your cleats. So I hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions or are wondering how to do some of the maintenance jobs I've spoken about, like changing your bottom bracket bearings, or servicing your headset and changing the bearings there, or servicing your Freehub, well, we've got you covered, because we've got an extensive library of maintenance videos here on GCNTech. So make sure you subscribe and check those out. And also, if you've got a mate that you ride with who has a really annoying creaky bike which is driving you mad, well, share it with them. This video in sort of a quite passive aggressive way. Love you, bye.